The first item on the agenda is Rain Ready presentation, and I think almost everybody in this room knows the esteemed Molly Oshun of the Center for Neighborhood Technology. I don't know how we could ever thank Molly for her leadership, her support, her guidance. It was all because of Helen's phone call to CNT, that Center for Neighborhood Technology, that Molly is here this evening, and she's going to do her Rain Ready presentation. Molly, you've been working for us, has it been a year?
It hasn't. CNT has been in Midlothian, I think, for a little over a year, but I came on just at the beginning of April.
It seems much longer, because you really have, you really worked us. And we actually had a meeting today that I'll report on. So Molly spends a lot of time in Midlothian. Molly's background is she's an engineer. And I want to welcome Molly's brother Lucas. Lucas who flew in today from California.
Special for the presentation.
So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Molly, and I think you're going to find this presentation pretty awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Is the mic better, or can I just speak? It's okay. I'm pretty loud. So thank you, Karen, for the introduction, and thank you all so very much for having me this evening, to Helen for bringing CNT in the first place, to all folks for your involvement in the process. And thank you truly for the leadership in this community, from the resident level up through this council, and all the way up truly to State Representative Will Davis, sort of how we all got started on this journey. So it's been very exciting for us, the Rain Ready team, to learn. As I think most of you know, this was a pilot for us. It was an experiment in a new form of community planning. So I thank you for your patience and collaboration as we all sort of figure out the path forward together. For those of you who might not know, Rain Ready is a program of the Center for Neighborhood Technology. CNT is about a 40-year-old urban sustainability nonprofit based in Chicago that does work related to urban sustainability and social justice, and this Rain Ready program is about a year old. It's a program to help communities and individuals find solutions to the problems related to too much or too little water by virtue of being here in Chicago and Cook County. We're so far focused on too much water, on issues related to urban flooding. Our work really kicked off with a meeting in this very room with State Representative Will Davis, and that was about a year ago, maybe a little more. There was another meeting here in March, also before my time, but many of you were here, I know. And then we had one meeting in July as well at the library. So yeah, we just want to thank everyone for chipping in many cases, well beyond their comfort zone. We have folks from Public Works writing grants. We have Karen, a former hospital administrator, designing engineering plans, and really just everyone chipping in together. Helen scouting the watershed, really working on her floodplain management certification on the side, and all together learning how to solve this problem together. So when we began this process, our end product was a plan for the village, plan of action to reduce flooding in the village, that brought about multiple benefits. So not just stormwater management, but also thinking about economic revitalization and greater social resilience. And we found through this process that a plan is a good starting place, but without a plan for implementation, without financial support, staffing support, and resident momentum, a plan won't get the community very far. So we've been working very hard to figure out how to make that plan actionable. And also, it's our hope, CNT is out looking for money to be able, we're, as I said, a nonprofit, so out looking for money so that we can stick around a little longer and be involved in some of the implementation process. So that's just my intro, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done so far and then the plan itself. So tonight I'll be giving an overview of the Rain Ready plan, letting you know sort of what we recommend, CNT, in partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, are looking to help the village move forward on solving this process, solving this problem. And then we'll also request that you adopt the Rain Ready plan. I've been told that that's probably not a vote folks are prepared to take this evening, but I hope that this presentation will begin that discussion. And if there are additional follow-up meetings or questions or concerns, of course, I'm available for any of those. So, the objectives of the Rain Ready plan. Starting out, we were looking to, can you folks see me or I should? Yeah, okay. We were looking to establish a shared understanding of flood risk in the community. Different people are flooding for different reasons. Why is that happening? Where is that happening? Achieving consensus on the priorities. Providing municipal leaders with a clear roadmap for implementation. Empowering the community leaders to own pieces of that plan. And preparing the community to implement a rain fund. We'll talk about that a little more as we move through. And then for the plan itself to serve as a reference document for future planning. During this planning process, we have engaged with an unbelievable number of partners. That first meeting with Rep. Will Davis was a pretty astounding representation of IDOT and IDNR, MWRD, number of local and regional elected officials, of course, the trustees and the mayor here. And since that time, as I mentioned, it's an initiative of CNT, the Village of Midlothian, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That Hornet is their Silver Jackets program. MWRD, the South Suburban Mayors and Managers Association, we've received financial support from the Active Transportation Alliance, Morton Arboretum, National Park Service, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, the Land Bank. I'm sure I've forgotten several members of this list, but it's been a pretty broad coalition of folks coming together. Under Karen's leadership, we have pursued grants to pay for green infrastructure, to pay for complete streets planning that looks at bringing together stormwater management and transportation planning together, which is, believe it or not, a pretty innovative thing that Midlothian is pioneering in this region. Working, of course, with FEMA, folks stepping into new roles like Kristen Ramirez in Public Works bringing in an $18,000 grant for tree replacement. And really just proving, as I said, with everyone working out of our comfort zone, that we're much greater than the sum of our parts. Together, the beautification committee can work with economic development, transportation, and housing. This process began with tremendous leadership in Helen and the Flood Lothian team, residents sharing their story. We've found, CNT, that above and beyond the most powerful way to bring the community together around solving a flooding issue is just really to talk through the personal impacts. And that's something that we saw to an inspiring degree here in the village. Helen is now actually advising other resident groups, other communities that we're working in, on how to move forward with documenting their flood and working together with municipalities to find solutions. We have a steering committee. Several members of the several trustees have been involved in that planning process as well. It's been terrific to have that leadership. And the planning priorities as we've been moving through. So I mentioned reduce flood risk. That's why we're here. Flooding is a tremendous challenge for the village of Midlothian. We heard about flooding impacting quality of life, contributing to foreclosed homes, rising rates of insurance. So that really just needed to be a priority. We also wanted to look at collaborative opportunities that would generate investment in the community. So looking at multi-use trails, complete streets planning. How do we think about this within the sort of broader context of Midlothian? And that connects to this third bullet, restoring a sense of place. We heard from, again, members of the steering committee, residents, that there was a need to sort of bring a spirit of the community back together, people working together to solve this problem, and feeling more invested in the village itself. So those are some of the things that we thought about as we worked through this plan. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was a key partner for us in performing the flood risk assessment. That survey included a survey of residents looking at topography, looking at the watershed flow through the community, historic flood records, development patterns, sewer maps, floodplain maps, It also included a review of all previous planning that had been done in the village and the region related to flooding. The MWRD Little Calumet River Watershed Plan, the Midlothian Creek Green Infrastructure Plan, some of the economic development and active transportation plans that have been done for the village. We also did our best to incorporate qualitative data. So it's an engineering study, but we also wanted to understand better how to incorporate resident stories and photos into the work that we were doing. Now, through that flood risk assessment, we were able to identify 4 primary types of flooding in the village. Overbanking from Natalie Creek is by far, I think, the most visible, the most discussed, and perhaps the most disgusting as floodwaters rise up into folks' homes at alarming rates, alarming frequency. But also common across the village is sanitary sewer backup. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's happening, or how and why and where that's happening in a moment. But that tends to be a more private problem. That's water coming up through floor drains in people's basements, or can come up in the streets, can come up through really any sort of low-lying drain in a home. Storm sewer backup, that's what you see in parts of the village like Jolly Homes or Belly Button Hill, where the ditch or the local drainage network tends to back up into streets, yards, can come into basements. And then groundwater seepage in basements. There's a high groundwater table in parts of the village, many of you probably know, and also just the way that yards are designed, if they're pitched so that water runs towards the building rather than away from it, it'll collect alongside the home and seep into the sides of people's homes. That can lead to foundation rot, mold, and then it can also find its way into those homes. All right. Bear with me for just a moment while I explain sanitary sewer backup. This is one of the more nuanced types of flooding that occurs. It is something that is happening across Cook County, but I want to take a moment just to get into the wonky engineering details of how and why that's happening, if you'll bear with me. So sanitary sewer backup in communities like Midlothian that have largely separate sewer systems is a result of infiltration and inflow. What that means is it's basically a way of describing how stormwater gets into the sanitary sewer system. So if you take a look here, the storm drain is much larger than the sanitary sewer drain. So the sanitary sewer, that holds all of our household water, whether that's showers, dishwashers, and all the rest. The storm sewer is much larger. It's designed to hold large volumes of rainwater. Over time, the sanitary sewer can degrade. It can get get cracks related to trees coming in, or other construction that happens to bump it, or just over time, infrastructure degrades. That's the infiltration side of things. The inflow side of things is related to improper connections. So people have, say, a drain in their driveway that should go into the storm sewer, but because, I don't know, the handyman who was putting it in found that the sanitary sewer was a little closer, a little easier to hook up to, it gets connected to the wrong system. So now whenever storm water flows across that driveway, the storm water is going into the sanitary pipe. So we get large volumes of water into a small pipe, causing backup in homes. It can also be the case that, so there's those 2 primary types. There's infiltration, which is through cracks, and there's inflow, which is through improper connections. The result is that a small pipe designed to hold only municipal wastewater ends up holding storm water. So that's why when there's a big storm, large volumes of storm water comes into the sanitary sewer pipe, overwhelms it, comes back up through people's homes. This is such a big problem across Cook County that MWRD recently passed a new regulation. It's the Inflow and Infiltration Corrective Action Program. They're not known for their sexy program names. And that's a program to require the village of Midlothian to reduce I&I measured by basement backup over the next 5 and 10, 15 years. There's different benchmarks. That's perhaps something you've heard about. Jeff and Joe are in the process, Joe Sperry and Jeff Koza are both in the process of trying to hatch a plan for Midlothian that would look at First, reducing I&I in public sewers, and second, reducing I&I in private sewers. So private sewers are basically anything on this side, and that's the responsibility of the homeowner, financially, legally. This is the responsibility of the village. It's a difficult problem because homeowners aren't necessarily equipped to pay for it. They don't necessarily know that it's their responsibility. And it's one that many municipalities across MWRD's tributary area are working to find solutions to. And it's something that CNT is also actively involved in learning more about in order to be of service to communities. So thanks for bearing with that portion. We'll talk a little bit more about the solutions and how the village can work through that together as we get into the plan, which is next up. So told you a little bit about how we got to, how we worked through the Rainbaby process, how we've come to understand the nature of the problem. Now I'll dig into our specific recommendations that will form a plan. So when we talk about, we find that when we talk about flooding and when we talk about flood solutions, it's helpful to break the solutions up into scales that we work a lot with residents, we work a lot with non-technical audiences, and so we try to think about how do we explain things in a way that folks can understand. So we talk about a rain-ready home, we talk about solutions at the scale of the home, we talk about solutions at the scale of the street, we talk about solutions at the scale of the creek, particularly here in Midlothian we do that. We talk about solutions at the scale of the village. And the type of flooding correlates somewhat, right? So obviously Natalie Creek is the creek we're talking about here. Infiltration and inflow, sewer backup, more relevant at the home scale. And then watershed-wide, streetscape planning relates to the volume of stormwater runoff that's going into our sewer systems and overwhelming the system across the village. So first, Rainbaby Creek. So the objective here is to reduce the risk of destructive overbank flooding and restore community value of Natalie Creek. I would anticipate that most folks are aware of the MWRD Phase 2 project that's recently been proposed, a $9 million project looking at upsizing culverts, stabilizing the creek banks, and then of course there's a detention pond that they're looking at right at Costner Avenue. They found that the current level of service of the creek is a 2-year level of service, and that will now be increased to a 25-year level of service. It's a huge improvement, but one that I think still leaves some homes at risk, so we're interested in looking at ways that the community can work together to increase the level of service. And the way that we talk about that is pursuing green infrastructure. So if we can, if the creek itself is designed to carry a X volume of water that is anticipated from a 25-year level of storm, if we can decrease the amount of water flowing into the creek during that storm size, then we can improve the resilience of the creek. And the way that we do that is by sinking water where it lands, keeping the water out of the creek in the first place by planting trees, by building rain gardens, permeable parking lots, all these different ways that are proven strategies truly for improving flood resilience in communities. So there is, in addition to the MWRD Phase 2 project, there is a group of us working on looking at a multi-use trail alongside the village, alongside the creek bank. We just met this morning with folks from SSMMA, the National Park Service, looking to roll active trams, looking to roll out that work in the next year. And then green infrastructure. What are all the different ways that we can keep the water out of the creek in the first place so that, it's going to be a slightly wider, more stable creek, but what if we can just keep more water out and reduce the flooding? The story that MWRD told is a fair one. They said, we're going to improve the capacity of the creek, but here's the thing. This creek is flooded since the beginning of time. This was a marsh. This was a prairie. And we can bring the level of service up to a certain degree to reduce the frequency of flooding, but we can't predict the weather. And the way things are going, storms look to be increasingly they're looking at increasing high intensity, short duration storm. So rather than a little bit all the time, a big storm over a weekend that comes down, overflows the banks. MWRD can't build a project large enough to contain that volume of water. But if we work together to build rain gardens to keep the water out of the sewer system, or excuse me, out of the creek bed in the first place, that will truly increase or decrease the risk of flooding in the community. So we have a bunch of different ways that we're interested in working on that with the village. So I was looking at regional partnerships. Folks upstream need to be doing this kind of work for it to work in Midlothian, right? Looking to buy out the adjacent land to the creek so that there can be additional green infrastructure, rain garden, bioswales, trees to retain the water at the edge of the creek. And then working with residents through how-to workshops, looking at public land here at Village Hall, the iGave project that Karen has been leading, just turned around right over there, and hopefully something, and then this complete streets plan with active trans that I mentioned as well. So all these different ways to sink the water where it lands and keep it out of the creek in the first place. Funding for that, MWRD has sort of non-committally expressed confidence that they expect to be able to pay for the cost of the Natalie Creek project. As for the rest of it, it's going to be a combination of grants and partnerships, a potential rain fund, that's a stormwater utility fee that residents and business owners, all property owners in the village chip in to cover the cost, cover the increasing cost of stormwater management in the community, which is a solution being used increasingly nationwide, particularly in Cook County, communities that have increasing flood risk. Working with the South Suburban Land Bank to take a look at where vacant properties can be converted, and then individual homeowners, building a movement around constructing rain gardens, working with the existing community capacity, Flood Lothian, and other active resident groups to sink the water where it lands. Moving forward now into Rain Ready Home. So this I&I program is a sticky, or this I&I challenge is a sticky one. It's personal, it's private, it's damaging, and now it's mandated by MWRD. It tends to be a hidden problem. CNT's done research that nationwide, folks that have basement backup don't like to talk about it. It's gross, it's embarrassing. They think it's just a problem that they alone are experiencing. But we have the data to show that it's pretty widespread in Midlothian. The strategy to solve this problem involves a combination of a home retrofit program to help homeowners maintain lateral lines, check for inflow issues, install backwater valves, which is a device to, it's basically like a trap door that goes in this lateral line. This is the pipe that connects your home to the sewer line, so it allows the water to go out but not back in during a surge. And so what this looks like is a service to both help homeowners understand the nature of the problem, what the solutions are available to them, but also to help pay for it. And that's where the idea of a rain fund really starts to become more attractive. It's a service that residents pay into with this direct payback of being able to receive services from this program. It starts to paint a more palatable picture for residents. And then what are some of the short-term solutions? How do we work with folks who aren't able to solve the problem right away, to flood-proof their garage, to direct the water away from their home, DIY opportunities, and then we're interested in moving forward with a rain-ready alert system. So a monitor went in from the USGS on Natalie Creek that folks are already using as an indicator of whether they expect to flood. What would it look like to put something in basements on sump pumps so that people could be alerted to rising floodwaters? We talked about the lateral line inspection. That's a requirement of the MWRD ICAP program. Looking at a cost-sharing program where the village is able to support a portion of the cost through the rain fund. And then short-term solutions, working with community organizations that can help get the word out on how people can do it themselves. The Illinois EPA Revolving Loan Fund is alive and available for communities that are interested in pursuing capital projects that they can show they would pay back. They're particularly interested in partnering on those kinds of opportunities related to stormwater utility fees or rain funds. So I think there's a definite opportunity, again, for Midlothian to be a model of how this kind of project would work, to take leadership in reducing basement backup. We can talk more about that. There are also grants and partnerships available to pay for those kinds of workshops and DIY programs. Rainbabies Street. So I don't have the number for Midlothian, but looking at the aerial development over time, it's the transformation of our communities from marshy, prairie, open land into parking lots, streets, sidewalks, roofs. That's why the water is coming with such intensity, is because it can no longer get into the ground where it once was able to sink and be held. So looking at different ways that we can incorporate green infrastructure into the street to reduce runoff and pooling in the streets and yards, that also improves the overall quality of life. So encourages people to spend time outside, restores that sense of place to the village that we discussed, all while reducing the stormwater runoff. Looking at specific areas of 147, Jolly Homes, Belly Button Hill area. The 147th Street project is particularly attractive because it's highly visible. Natalie Creek runs right, sometimes over, which is to say under. And we, in partnership with the village, have applied for the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, CMAP, to come do a corridor study that looks, again, specifically at combining transportation improvements, economic development, and stormwater management on the creek. So we're recommending that this 147th Street project become a model for green infrastructure installation across the village. Jolly Homes and Belly Button Hill both being specific areas that have that storm sewer backup into people's streets and would benefit from looking at green infrastructure in the public right of way. It's also an opportunity for the village to sort of walk the walk as it asks homeowners to make changes on their private property. You're able to point to these demonstration projects of how the village is taking the lead in installing these projects, much like the parking lot projects that Karen has been working to get installed, and Joe and the Public Works team as well, of course. And then I again want to mention this pretty exciting partnership with the Active Transportation Alliance. I'm sure you've been hearing some from folks about that, the policy and working together on that. Again, this is a huge, pioneering, brand new leadership move to partner transportation improvements with stormwater management. So people talk about complete streets. That's a movement that's really exploded over the last maybe 10 years, and partnering to think about, as we're in there making better connections for pedestrians, bicyclists, multimodal use, how do we start thinking about stormwater management? That's a pretty impressive thing, and for Midlothian to be the start of that movement and look at expanding across the south suburbs and then regionally and nationwide, I think is something really to be quite proud of. And we have the buy-in from SSMMA and from MWRD, and again from CMAP for Midlothian to be a pilot for that work. So that's an area that I'm particularly excited about, in case that wasn't obvious. And now looking across the village, so we painted this plan, this picture, these many projects that relate to a whole image of resilience in the community. How do we improve the capacity to finance, design, and implement the plan? The plan itself can be as beautiful as can be, but if there isn't the money and the personnel to carry it forward, probably won't get very far. So the specific strategies relate to reducing I&I village-wide, starting with the public sewer. That's the way the program is structured. First you chase the public sewer, and then you start looking at what to do in the private right-of-way. Increasing the village capacity. So based on conversations with steering committee members and folks in the community, I'm hearing that there's a need to have a day-to-day administrator administering this plan, keeping an eye on the integration of these programs across the programs in Village Hall. We recommend hiring a village planner, someone who can keep an eye on economic development programs, who can keep an eye on integrating these different recommendations. Sounds like an expensive order, I can see, and I know that it is something that would be a stretch under the current budget. However, a village planner is something that can pay for itself pretty quickly. If you have someone who's dedicated to writing and pursuing grants and keeping an eye on the development of these programs, there is money available that would bring the coffers back up above where they were before that person was brought in. And then also, we've not yet talked about the need for National Flood Insurance Program compliance and the community rating system, but one of the sort of biggest pieces we heard when we went out to the public. So this was a lot of what we did with the engineering wonks, with the planners, with our partner agencies, with the steering committee. But most frequently what we heard when we went to the public was, you've got to do something about the raising insurance rates. Most of the people, or majority of the people that came to our meeting, that was a pretty major motivator, hearing about how it's doubled in the last year, how people are having to make this choice. It's more expensive than their mortgage, people who are no longer able to stay in their homes because the NFIP rates are just skyrocketing. And there's been excellent movement, we know, from residents to try to pursue this community rating system, which is FEMA's way of bringing down those rates. But there has to be some leadership too from the buildings department to bring the village into compliance, because CRS is an above and beyond measure, NFIP is the baseline. And I know this is a well-discussed topic among this group. Just want to reiterate that we see it as a key step forward. And hiring a building superintendent who is well-versed in those codes and can lead that effort into compliance seems like a pretty important first step. Also looking at redrawing the FEMA floodplain, partly because of those insurance rates, also partly because of the opportunity for development in the TOD. And that's something that we heard from MWRD that they might consider as part of the Natalie Creek project. Looking at different ways to improve watershed management through protective ordinances, community-wide green infrastructure. Again, partnering with people upstream. There is so much flooding in Cook County, so much flooding in the south suburbs. Rain Ready, after we I was going to say conclude, but we're going to stick around. After we sort of produce the plan in Midlothian, we're headed east. We're going to be working in Robbins, Blue Island, Calumet Park, Calumet City, Dalton, all these places that have flooding, impacting severely the economic development and community resilience. So really learning to work with those other communities to figure out how other people are approaching this problem. SSMMA is an excellent resource. They're working to build their capacity around this issue. And again, in many ways, Midlothian is a leader. Blue Island has maybe been at it a little bit earlier, but Blue Island, a lot of how they started, believe it or not, and it's before my time, so I don't feel bad bragging, was with a CNT economic development plan. And they sort of took that work and they began to pursue these partnerships. They began to look for funding. They hired a planner who was responsible, Jason Berry, many folks know him, who was responsible for really bringing in those grant dollars, staying consistent with the implementation of the plan. And they too are a leader now. And Midlothian, in large part because she keeps talking about being at the table. Well, Karen's been at the table. She's at more meetings than I can count. And folks are starting to take notice, and that's part of why we've been able to pull in grant funding from CMAP, from IDNR. We've got SSMMA interested in working, National Park Service interested in being a partner. So I think there's a lot of really exciting momentum happening through this process and through sort of more broadly the work that this group has been able to do. And there's sort of a next step of buy-in that we're asking you to do in adopting this plan and moving forward with some of the financing strategies, with personnel, investment, and then maintaining public engagement. That's such a core part of how this work has been successful, is the grassroots work, community groups that have been working here, that found CNT and brought us in, and that have helped us understand the nature of the problem. So really thinking about how do we, and if the goal is to now work at identifying financing solutions, how do we articulate to the community? And that's next up for the Rain Ready team. He said, well, we have a lot of these wins and we have an idea of how we want to move forward, but we need to tell people about it. We need to help people understand, residents and business owners in Midlothian understand that there's good work being done, there's progress being made, and we need their buy-in to take it to the next level. And I think that sort of needs to be maintained as a consistent thread, is that there's public support. This is a movement that's driven by members of the public. Again, talking about how this can be funded, this revolving loan fund is an incredible resource. You just have to prove that you can pay for it, and that's where we think the Rain Fund could be a really key strategy. MWRD is available, Cook County is available to help for some portions of it. And some of it needs to be led by the Village of Midlothian. So the storm sewer maintenance, the NFIP compliance, and the community rating system, those are steps that FEMA in particular needs to see a level of dedication from the village in order to move forward with support. Looking at ways to amend zoning to require green stormwater infrastructure, stormwater management, getting involved in that regional planning effort, building partnerships, maintaining community involvement. A moment just to take a look at what we've been able to bring in so far. The ActiTrans Complete Streets Policy, planning that program, $80,000. The Morton Arboretum grant, I mentioned Kristen Ramirez brought in, $18,000. National Park Service Creeks and Trails, priceless. No, we don't know what that is. But Diane Vanta is a phenomenal gal. She's the one responsible for she was one of the sort of main project managers for the Cal Sag Trail. And now she's really excited, not only in bringing this effort along Natalie Creek, but also thinking, she's really encouraged the group to think bigger. She says, why just the Midlothian part? You need to be talking to folks upstream. It should make it all the way to the forest preserve. We want to connect to the Cal Sag Trail. How do we think about moving through Crestwood or Robbins, where the creek goes underground? How do we keep the trail moving to increase those green spaces? So she's just a phenomenal resource and knows a lot about navigating the politics and, of course, the financing. The iGate parking lot and rain garden held up, but moving forward. The CMAP, the local technical assistance for 147th, that's the specific corridor study looking at economic development, stormwater, transportation. The Natalie Creek project, I put a question mark because they haven't quite committed yet, but that's a $9 million project. The RTA Access to Transit grant, that's come in already. It's the CMAP that is still anticipating. And then Karen has also applied to the Chi-Cal fund for a parking lot and a rain garden, and more to come. So just to take a look at the success that has already been achieved through this group, and again, the need for some leadership, a dedicated person who can carry this work forward. So what are the next steps? Get the money. And I think we believe that adopting the Rain Ready plan is one of the first steps to help with the financing. CNT is interested in continuing to work with the village in that capacity, so looking at innovative financing solutions. What does a rain fund look like? How do you tie that to a home retrofitting program? And green infrastructure across the village. Acknowledging the challenge. I think that's a big part of adopting the plan, saying, okay, this is a serious problem. It's impacting residents, and we're dedicated to coming up with a shared solution to move forward. And flooding is something that impacts some people, but not all people. And so the solutions that we're looking at are ones that also are designed to generate a sense of place, to bring back investment, to stop the foreclosures and bring people back to the businesses, bring that vitality and that sense of community, civic life together, to lead a working group. So we have a steering committee that's sort of, we're working to divide and conquer. There's these many pieces, as I presented tonight, and we need leaders who can take each of those pieces and carry them forward. So if you're interested, if any of you need a little hobby on the side, we've got a team working hard and can always use more help. To hire a plan administrator, it can more than pay for itself. I'll say again and again. I know that's an investment, but that's what communities have done in many other places to commit to moving this program forward, to have someone who's keeping an eye on these pieces. I have worked with a number of staff in Midlothian and been blown away by the level of commitment and creativity and hard work. And I don't see anyone who's available to take this work on in addition to what they're already doing. So really finding someone who can be dedicated and committed, not just, this wouldn't have to be their whole work, but somebody who's really committed to moving this forward, who's available to pursue funding, who's available to attend those regional meetings with SSMMA. And then to pursue a village rain fund. And again, this is something I'd be very interested to speak more with you about. How do we engage the public to think about how do we tell that story? How do we tie, if we're asking for money, how do we think about what we're promising in exchange? How do we tie that directly to home retrofit? So people say, okay, I'm paying an extra $4 a month on my utility bill, but in response or in exchange, I'm receiving these services. I'm receiving a home upgrade. The flooding stops, and I'm seeing across the village an increase in the amount of green infrastructure going in economic development in the community. So that's it. Thank you all so much for your patience and attention. It's been an honor working in Midlothian, truly. I'm very inspired and moved by the dedication of the folks that work and live here. And I thank you very much for your time.
I am at a lot of different tables every day, but I'm not at the table alone because a lot of these volunteers come with me, especially Helen and Jackie.
Yeah.
They show up at these meetings, they speak. They were at the active, the training for the complete streets. Two volunteers gave 2 days of their time, and I was going to bring this up under my agenda. We could put in for a travel stipend. And here's mine, $60, which I'm going to turn over to the Village of Midlothian. They didn't even put in for their stipend. I did, and Trustee Ivan, who I'm assuming is going to turn his over to the village as well. So they gave up 2 days, didn't even put in for their travel stipend. And that's just the kind of commitment that we have as we're trying to move these projects forward. So again, Molly, thanks for your leadership, and I got to thank these people who show up. They don't get paid, they are volunteers, but they're true leaders. So thank you all, and Molly, again. We don't want to lose you. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. I know it was a long presentation already, but if there are any questions, I don't know if this is the appropriate forum.
Are we going to have this to digest?
Yeah, I can share the slides, and then I'm also working on the plan itself right now, which will include much more technical background, and that should be ready probably end of the month or early next.
This goes prior.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send it to Karen tonight.
Great, thanks.
And if you don't have my email already, I'll include that for Karen as well. So if there's specific questions, I'm down here really at least once a week. So I'm happy to stay after hours if that works better, or just to be available.
But again, you're not going away. If we need you to come back and talk about a rain fund and the mechanics of a rain fund, after the board has had time to get the plan, digest the plan, probably going to be more questions, and I think you'd be available to come out again.
Yep, it would be my pleasure. Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Holly. And Lucas, thank you. Thanks for spending your